Hello, everyone. I hope everyone can see me and hear me. And uh, don't believe everything you read on the internet. Okay, everyone, hello. And today we're going to talk about, well, at least one aspect of the 18th of Brumaire or the 9th of November coup in 1799. That is typically attributed to as Napoleon's coup, although it was a very much a group effort at the time. What I want to talk about mostly is this notion that we have, the notion that is sort of explained away in the narrative because the narrative gets very complicated, that Napoleon comes back from Egypt and just launches a coup. That he returned from Egypt with that express purpose, and it leaves out a lot of the usual narrative leaves out a lot of the extra content, but that's usually also because people are rushing to get to the next thing and the next thing and the next thing. So not the incredible, but the story of 1799 is rarely told in full. So at the start, so we're not going to start the story of the coup, not at the coup itself, not at 5 years before that at Thermidor. We're gonna have to start in Egypt. And Napoleon launches the Egyptian campaign. Now, it's debated between, is this effectively a political exile for him, or does he see some ambition toward, does he have some ambitious vision for this, or is this some sort of convenient political exile that people have forced him into? But i'm I'm of the opinion, honestly, that he sees the potential in it, and it is a very big adventure for him and his army. And but the problem is that they get stuck. By 1799, Napoleon is pounding at the walls of Acre, and his advance further into Syria and the Ottoman Empire is halted. This is largely in part due to the fact that the French are becoming less and less popular in Egypt, that they're not used to fighting in that sort of area, and the fact that the British have completely and utterly blockaded him. Meanwhile, while Napoleon is facing this prospect of a giant Ottoman army bearing down on him or on Egypt at some point soon, in Europe, France is France is about to face probably the biggest crisis since 1792, and that was stopped at Valmy. The the French Directory has completely and utterly fumbled all of the gains of 2 or 3 years before, that is to say, Napoleon's victory in Italy in 1797. And Napoleon had inadvertently given cause for the Russians to join the war by invading Malta, because Tsar Paul considered himself a member of the order, and after the order of a member of the Order of Knights Hospitalier, who were owners of Malta, and some even named him, and a portion of the order even named him the new Grand Master after the order was kicked out of Malta. So, a new British initiative, coupled with the Russians, coupled with the Austrians, sets a four-way invasion into France. An Anglo-Russian invasion in the Low Countries, that is, say, the Netherlands under the Batavian Republic. another Austrian advance through the Rhine, and another Austrian and Russian advance from south and from northern Italy. And within a short while, by the start of 1799, the Batavian Republic looks like it will be lost in the Netherlands. The Parthenopean Republic is completely lost, with the Kingdom of Naples retaking it. The republics in Italy are also in front of collapse. And this happens in very quick succession in a very few months. Archduke Charles wins his victory at Stockach and pushes the army of the Rhine back to the Rhine. The Russian Surovov in Italy and Korsakov in Germany advance into the other sister republics of France. Surovov pushes General Moreau out of Turin and Milan, pushing him back to Genoa. General MacDonald is also defeated on the Trebia and also is pushed back to Genoa. The Piedmontese Republic revolts, throwing out the French administrators because General Joubert and General Grouchy had basically robbed the Piedmontese Republic of its art and treasure. And lastly, on the 15th of August, the same General Joubert is killed at the Battle of Novi, and his comrade Grouchy and then General Perignon ignominiously surrender. This means that the Allied armies, the coalition armies, are now at the gates of France in the south and in the north and in the center. The only thing really holding them back at that point is the fact that the French army of Switzerland is still in Genoa under Marshal Massena. All of this information gets to Napoleon, mainly through some things get through to him through French couriers and just other people, but most of the news comes from the British, who taunt Napoleon in Egypt with news of the big disasters and catastrophes. They even publish some of his family letters to further mock him in Egypt. Which is one of the ways I think Napoleon finds out that Josephine has again been unfaithful to him. But another letter that is also from early in 1799, from I think the spring, comes from his brother Joseph, saying that the order in the Republic in France proper is collapsing and that the politics are becoming again unstable, partially because of all of these defeats that have happened. And Napoleon decides to leave for Egypt in the summer of 1799. He starts a retreat from Acre, and then defeats a Turkish landing at Abukir. But quickly after that, he leaves, absconds with a few select marshals, a few select troops, without telling anyone. Importantly, on the 23rd of August, 1799. And from that date to his arrival in France on the 9th of October, he is mostly isolated from any and all news. As far as Napoleon is, we can consider him to be isolated from any and all news. And as far as Napoleon is considered, he is returning to France to try and save it before it collapses completely. Because if France falls, his adventure in Egypt is over anyway. There is also some notion that he is also doing it for family and he doesn't want to leave his brothers in the lurch. Napoleon is can be. There are assertions that Napoleon is very big on family, and trusts them all beyond reason sometimes. By the time Napoleon has actually returned to Egypt, the armies of the Archduke Charles, who is here on the White Horse, have actually stopped their advance into Switzerland, thinking that they have pushed the army of Switzerland into a corner, and they turn north. The army under Marshal Surovov is also advancing along with 3 other armies onto Switzerland and Genoa. Genoa, Zurich. And they think they're gonna crack the army of Switzerland led by Marshal Massena. But somehow Massena manages to defeat Massena manages to defeat the Russians in Zurich, partially because it's Switzerland and a giant mountainous area. He manages to defeat one of the Austrian armies that is led by a General Jelačić. That would be the famous, the 1849 Jelačić's father. And he defeats the armies one by one, so by the time Surovov is in Zurich, he has absolutely no support from the other Russian and Austrian armies, and he decides to hightail it out of Switzerland before he suffers a similar fate. Hence why Surovov manages to live out his career without suffering a single defeat. The fortunately also is that the Anglo-Russian invasion of the Netherlands also is pushed out, and suddenly and these things happen within about a week of each other by the end of September. General Brunn wins in the Netherlands, and General Massena wins in Zurich on the 26th of September. And suddenly, the entire situation changes quite a bit politically for the Republic by the time Napoleon gets back to France on the 9th of October. Suddenly France doesn't need as much military saving as it seemed to have done just weeks ago. Still, this doesn't help save the reputation of the government and the Directory. The disaster in early 1799 is so big that everybody is basically plotting to either overthrow or change the Republic, or change the Directory with something else. From neo-Jacobin movements who are just waiting for this popular uprising to come through, to the more conservative elements who want to overthrow the Directory before this popular uprising can even happen. Or even the royalist elements who are also expecting another sort of uprising or overthrow to occur, or to get enough connections and to invite the then Louis XVIII to take the throne again. Well, for the first time. One of the conservative elements is the old survivor of the revolution, Abbé Sieyès, who manages to become one of the directors in 1799. The Directory has not been this clean-cut political system as it was imagined when it was founded, that it would have this 1/3 of the legislatures would be elected every year, and one new director would be elected every year, and so on and so forth. Instead, the directors had used their influence to rig elections and get rid of undesirables several times over. And this time in 1799, all but one of the directors was changed. First, it started with Sieyès, then the Jacobins appointed one of their own as a new director, and then one more Jacobin director was appointed alongside Roger Ducos, who is also a more conservative director, leaving the whole thing in a rather ambiguous state. The only director who almost serves out his 5-year term is Paul Barras, who is incredibly corrupt and has been the only person to survive this system in his position. Sieyès himself has an axe to grind against the Directory because the founders of the Directory ignored his suggestions for the new political system, and he has been searching for a way to get back into politics ever since his heyday in 1789. Sieyès was the author of that famous pamphlet of 1789, "What is the Third Estate?" in the French Revolution. What is the Third Estate? Everything. What does it want? What it currently is? Nothing. What does it want to be? Something. Was the main point of the pamphlet that argued that the Third Estate, that is to say everybody else who aren't nobility or the clergy in France, were actually everything that France was and the other two weren't. Interestingly, Sieyès is one of those people that before the revolution he was a member of the clergy, much like his associate Talleyrand, who is Minister for Foreign Affairs, who was a bishop, while Sieyès was an abbot. Now, Sieyès is going to start, like many others, is going to start spreading his idea to the political circles, that starting to feel out people for a coup. He gets the support of his other fellow director Roger Ducos, he gets the support of Talleyrand, and they manage to get the support of the Minister of the Police, Fouché, who is the third one here, who up until then was a supporter of the Jacobin radicals, but turned away from them in those recent years. The other two who come into contact with everyone are the Bonaparte brothers. That is to say, Napoleon's brothers Joseph and Lucien. Joseph is famous, has gotten prominent in diplomatic circles, while Lucien is a member of one of the two legislatures. The thing that was missing from this coup plot for most of 1799 was a military figure, somebody who could rally the troops. Now, the problem was that out of the generals that Sieyès could considered, Generals Augereau and Juron were Jacobin, were out of the questions because they were Jacobins. General Lefebvre, who was commander of the Paris garrison, was out of the question because he was too old. Generals Messena and Brun were out of the questions because they were at the front defending the Netherlands and Switzerland. Napoleon, as one author put it, could have been in Kamchatka for all anyone knew at that point in the summer of 1799. The general that Sieyès sort of was trying to set up for this, General Joubert, had actually gotten himself killed at Novi and was no longer in the running. While the other two, Generals Moreau and General Bernadotte, could not be trusted. They were too timid and were on the fence. Well, Moreau was considered to be too timid, while nobody really trusted Bernadotte because he was always hedging his bets and on the fence. But in the end, Sieyès initially tried to either persuade Moreau or Bernadotte to act as his quote unquote sword. This is all happening before Napoleon is even back. Now, Bernadotte is serving at the time as Minister of War, and Bernadotte has a history with Napoleon, and well, he has quite a history with Napoleon that goes beyond just the military service. Yeah. When Bernadotte was appointed to Napoleon's army of Italy, first Napoleon tried to have, and as the war in Italy was ending, Napoleon tried to have sorry, as the war in Italy was ending in 1797, Bernadotte angled to become the Minister of War the 2 years before. But Napoleon used his pull in Paris and intrigue to have Bernadotte appointed to be governor of the Ionian Islands. After which Bernadotte used whatever pull he had to actually get command of the army of Italy from after Napoleon resigned and went off back to Paris. Napoleon then uses his intrigue to remove Bernadotte from that and makes him an ambassador to Vienna in order to not have him command the army in Italy. There's also the little fact that Napoleon, by the end of the same war, had broken up Bernadotte's division into between all of the other armies, which caused some bitter blood between the men. And also, Bernadotte was married to. Bernadotte was in 1789, while Napoleon is in Egypt. Bernadotte marries Napoleon's old fiancée, Désirée Clary, whose sister is married to Joseph Bonaparte, which means that Bernadotte and Napoleon at the time are family. And this is going to have quite an effect on Napoleon from that point on. And Napoleon's return from Egypt is very sudden and very surprising to a lot of people. By all accounts, he should have been shot for it, because he deserted his post. But he was far too popular to, well, allow him to get that done to him. Upon returning from Egypt, he first sorts out his issues with Josephine and the family, and afterwards, Josephine's apartments become the headquarters for the political maneuverings during the October of 1799, where all of these generals and politicians are meeting and gathering and trying to organize this coup that is now agreed between Sieyès and Napoleon. Sieyès basically goes to Napoleon. The story goes that Sieyès goes to Napoleon after he hears that he's back, and General Moreau says, "That is your man, not me." It is assumed that this has all along been a coup that was being prepared by Sieyès, and, well, Napoleon just parachutes into it as a popular military figure who has the support in the army to be able to pull this off and has popular recognition to pull this off. But Sieyès still expects that he will be the one dictating how the political order will go after how the new political order will be constructed. And then we get to the coup itself, that is almost completely and utterly bungled by Napoleon himself. everyone, like, coups are not an easy thing to do. And Napoleon is very impatient and does not wait for the appropriate moment. What happens is that Sieyès had arranged for an emergency session of the Council of the Ancients to summon via emergency decree the legislatures to Saint-Cloud and appoint Napoleon the commander in the armies in the wider area of Paris in order to secure Saint-Cloud against the popular uprising. After which all of the legislators are brought to Saint-Cloud, or go to Saint-Cloud, they're summoned, and the only point of failure of this coup is if all of these legislators start debating the merits of the coup and the change of political system. While Sieyès had been the one arguing that, well, just shoot the opposition, Napoleon and the other generals were the ones who were a bit more lenient on the whole situation and wanted to start this new order not in the way that the previous coups and overthrows in the French Republic had gone, because every previous overthrow had bloodshed. They didn't want another coup that will severely anger somebody and just demonstrate that, oh, it's not just the same business as usual. They wanted a real change of tact and this theater of legality. So there was to be no bloodshed. Well, there was to try and be no bloodshed, and Napoleon, in his impatience to try and convince the legislators, was not prepared for the fact that these people did not want to or have to listen to him, because he tries both times to walk into both of the chamber of the Council of the Ancients and the Chamber of Deputies, and he is shouted down, screamed at one point grabbed, thrown, and he can't deal with that sort of opposition. These are his legal superiors, and they don't want to listen to him, nor do they care who he is. That is not a situation he's been in for a while. And so the whole situation is actually saved by the people around Napoleon having much calmer heads than he does, mainly his brother Lucien, who basically tells the soldiers outside to clear out the deputies that are quote-unquote holding knives and holding the other deputies as hostages, and threatening the Republic and so on and so forth, and that he would stab his own brother through the heart if he ever contemplated overthrowing the French Republic. At which point the soldiers go in and manage to push everyone out of the chambers, and then the politicians go in and try and reconvene every one of their supporters back into the chambers in order to declare the overthrow of the Republic and the establishment of the consulate. And that is, well, that's me going through the whole all of my notes rather quickly here. But what I basically wanted to talk about is that narrative that Napoleon returns from Egypt with this entire plan that was going to happen was neither his plan nor his real intent upon returning from Egypt. He may have harbored political ambitions, in a way he did harbor political ambitions, because he had tasted what it is to have political power on his campaign in Italy when he does establish the Cisalpine Republic and the other entities there and basically rules Italy. And after he has returned from Italy to France, he even asks, would it be possible to lower the legal age for becoming one of the directors in order for himself to run as a director? And some say he even feels out whether or not somebody would be inclined to overthrow the directory at that point. But that is not viable, and sometimes some of the records and memoirs are always colored with Napoleon always having the intent to do what he wanted to do, always having the intent to do what he did, but that is sometimes doubtful. And in all honesty, it could have been any one of the mentioned generals to conduct this coup, and maybe even, let's say, as actually run things afterwards, had things gone slightly or even a bit differently. But by choosing Napoleon, Sayez basically, well, throws himself out of a job again. And I think that was all that I wanted to talk about right now. Anyone have any questions, or and has this all made any sense so far? Because I am reading from my notes of a thing I've plotted out and studied more of for well, for this morning. Okay. Oh, hello. Oh. What did I... Okay. Yeah, that is about all I wanted to say. And yes, most of this is in the previous series that I made, and I mean, the next steps after were consolidation. Once on the military front, that is to, well, push out the Russians and Austrians back out of Italy, re-establish the Italian Republic, re-establish the Batavian Republic. Well, re-establish the Italian Republic. The Batavian Republic was re-established, but when Brun saved it from the Anglo-Russian invasion. And that leads to the Battle of Marengo in that is some Napoleon considered it a big turning point of his career because it's a very big near defeat for him. He always remembered people that were there with him before and after Marengo. On the home front, it's the establishment of, well, Napoleon's system. It's normalizing relations with the Catholic Church through the Concordat. Something that I've been meaning to make a video about, but the problem to do that, I also need to cover the well, the relationship between the revolution and the Catholic Church, and that is a big mess that a lot of historians avoid talking about even. And I still haven't found a good enough explanation to what exactly was so controversial in the... What exactly was the problem or so controversial in the constitution of the clergy that the revolution implements, and what the exact systems of worship were implemented by the Republic in the 1790s. But that's all of the questions that are necessary to even make a video about how that's resolved with the Concordat between Napoleon and the Pope. And I mean, that's also a deal that's basically made between Napoleon and the Pope, and nobody really likes it on either side of it except Napoleon and the Pope. Napoleon then, also starts to act against the... He sort of... He tries to settle the entire war with Austria, Russia, and Britain, and that is done through some treaties and the Treaty of Amiens, most famously. But the thing about that treaty is that Napoleon breaks it even before it's signed, because it involves neutrality of countries in Italy and those sorts of things, which Napoleon ignores. And then Britain, if Britain had been under another government, as it comes under in a few years after that, when William Pitt returns, there wouldn't have been a Treaty of Amiens. It's specifically there because the government in Britain wants peace, the then Whig government, before William Pitt the Younger returns. Then comes Napoleon's zenith with the establishment of the empire and his victories at Austerlitz and in Europe, and then in Vienna and the entry into Berlin in 1807, and then starts the mistakes. First, starting off with Spain, which was probably, I would say, Napoleon's bigger mistake than Russia, because it just sucks out so much life out of the Napoleonic Empire trying to tame Spain that it's impossible. It sucks so much life, so much resource, so much money. And then Napoleon decides to go after Russia. First of all, Spain... Well, before that, Spain inspires the uprising among the Austrians and in Tyrol, and the Austrian Wars of 1808, 1809. And then comes that idea to... try and tame Russia, because Russia had been defying Napoleon on the continental system and trading with Britain, which it wasn't supposed to. Well, that's... Some say that's just an excuse, but I think that might have actually even been the reason for it, because Napoleon was quite staunch on the continental system, or tried to be, to starve out Britain and cut it off from the European economy. Could he have avoided the Russian debacle? I mean, yes, by not even going into it, but it would have required Napoleon to not be who he is. And that's the main problem. The Russian campaign is, it's something that shouldn't have started, and it could have even been avoided had Napoleon married... It could have been avoided had Napoleon married the one of the Grand Duchesses of Russia. But that would also depend on if Tsar Alexander would have held to the treaty after that, because Napoleon marrying the Marie Louise of Austria is what causes even more Russian suspicion towards Napoleon, and suspicion that Russia might not be as secure as she thinks in this relationship with Napoleon, because before Napoleon enters into this marriage with the Habsburgs, Tsar Alexander feels that he's the one who's very close with Napoleon, and the marriage with the Habsburgs undermines that quite a lot. And Napoleon, again, is Napoleon is very big on family. He trusts family beyond reason sometimes, and he doesn't see the Austrian betrayal it wasn't really... I mean, he would have perceived it as a betrayal coming in 1813, because he can't believe that Papa Francois, Kaiser Franz, would allow that. After all, they're family. That's also probably why he tends to turn a blind eye towards Bernadotte becoming the King of Sweden later. To Marshal Bernadotte becoming the King of Sweden later is because he has this tangential family relationship as his brother-in-law, basically. And Napoleon was fiancé to Bernadotte's wife Desiree, and some assume that a lot of Napoleon's leniency towards Bernadotte came from that regard he still had for Desiree. So that and that's why Bernadotte, who is typically described as the most disliked of the marshals by every other general in France and by Napoleon himself, gets to get away with this because he has that personal relationship with the Bonaparte family. He has the political pull in Paris to keep himself there, and he has the support of his own soldiers. He is very good towards, well, the places he was one of those marshals who was very good towards his own soldiers, his own officers, the places he occupied, and his prisoners of war, which is what gets him in good with several important Swedes in 1807, I think 1808, which is why he's then recommended as a potential heir to the throne of Sweden when the Swedish king is considered to, well, be close to death without an heir. But no, I don't think there is anything that can stop the Russian debacle short of Russia trusting Napoleon, the Russian Tsar trusting Napoleon, and Napoleon not being Napoleon. And wanting this continental system to starve out Britain. Although there is an incident in 1811, if I recall one of the books that I wanted to look into, where Napoleon winds up selling grain to Britain with the idea that he will extort them for it, basically, but ends up seeing the British through the winter. Hello, how are you? Let's see now. There's some fun stories I noted down during my notes, but they didn't really fit into the whole narrative that I was giving there. There's one where, I mean, this is a bit mean, but there's one where Napoleon's longtime friend and General and Field Marshal Lannes, who is serving with Napoleon and has been serving with Napoleon in Egypt for 14 months, finds out that his wife had given birth to a son right around the end before they're about to escape. I read somewhere possibly that the town of Vis on the same name now. Yes, well, the nature of the whole Adriatic coast being littered with islands is that it is very good for smuggling and for piracy because you have so many little inlets and outlets and so many little towns that let you sneak through stuff, and escape without getting noticed. So it's very conducive to that to that sort of business. and it very likely was because the VIII is quite exposed, and it is one of those places that is slightly beyond beyond, that is further away from the coast and a bit beyond French control, because the French had these naval bases, naval gun bases on key parts of the coast, some of which, most of which are in ruins right now, and they would use them to try and control the narrows, well, the narrow bits between the islands. So, but Vis is quite a bit further away from that, and it is very much likely that it was used as a smuggling base, much like later it would be used as one of the partisan outholds in World War II. Uh, there's also a lot of stories of naval battles between between the British, French, and the Russians in the Adriatic. It's a lot of, well, it's a lot of small reports of ships trying to break the blockade, or some Russian attempts to take the islands, take some of the coastline with the aid of Montenegrins and Morlacks and such. Just and of course the British trying to, well, harass French trade in the Adriatic and the coast, because it's also one of the reasons why the British attain such global dominance in this period, is that a lot of the old is because the French conquer so much of Europe, that a lot of the old merchant navies that of Europe are formally become under the French flag, and the British are able to just, well, they start swatting them away. So the same thing happens to the big fleet of the Republic of Ragusa that is spread all over the world at points, because suddenly when the Republic of Ragusa stops existing, when Dubrovnik is conquered by the French, those ships are fair game for the British to take. Okay. A bit of a less active Saturday than usual, it seems. But oh, there's a dog outside. Sorry about that. If you can hear that. If I can find something, I'll be. Oh, okay. Then I've set up something correctly at least. Okay. I wanted to talk about this because I noticed it was still, well, I noticed it was still November, and that, well, one of the things I had worked on is Napoleon's coup and the whole matter of considering how historical events happen and in what order, and what somebody knows at what point in during them. My specialization is formally 19th and 20th century history, with and I did my thesis on the Boxer Rebellion in China. Uh, I mean, I mostly took that specialization because it was also the one that allowed the most free selection of elective subjects during the master's portion. So I use that to also study other things from medieval history, early modern history, and so on. But I've mostly done my biggest interest has been 19th century world history. Uh, the problem always being the fact that a lot of books aren't available or translated, and I'm sometimes stuck with things that I'm sometimes stuck with unsatisfactory things. Like I can't find a good book on the Second Empire of France for the life of me. It's just some subject that isn't really translated or covered that much. I've had an interest in Napoleonics also. Well, the problem is that the problem has been that I've decided to the focus on the, focus on these videos on Croatian and regional and then expansive history of the world that takes a lot of time to do and also juggle with life and everything else. I am going to try and get the current series to as far as I can. I am trying to get to 1918 at the least for the whole joint history to get done, and I think I'll continue. I mean, the history changes at that point in 1918, but I will continue even after that. I want to continue this series, and I want to get to, well, quote unquote, the end, because I have quite a few ideas for episodes beyond this. It's just a matter of getting to them and realizing all of the elements that play into the whole thing. Like this current series on Louis II is taking a while because you realize how much European history as a whole played a part in, well, played some minor part in the collapse of the whole thing. It From a historical perspective, if he wanted to do what is a takedown of a dictator, there were much more better ways to there were much better ways to do it than the way he did it. Much more accurate ways, much more entertaining ways. Uh, as entertainment, as a film, it just doesn't work because as history it doesn't work because it's not even a character assassination. It's making things up that never were. While the well from a entertainment, it's not a good movie like Ridley Scott's Napoleon. It's just it doesn't work it doesn't work for me. Like there's more entertaining pieces out there that are that are also complete bunk historically wise, but and much more low budget at that. I am hoping to want to try and get to try and continue this story about Napoleon at least a bit with, like, I've had the a outline for a series, so for an episode or a series on the Concordat out for a while now, but it's just not coming together facts wise. uh, I but it, and if it doesn't come together, then I just don't. There are other things come along that need to get done. Like, I'm also planning a series that takes a look at certain aspects of the Croatian-Hungarian political systems during the medieval times, like in shorter videos on how that worked or how we assume that worked. As when I get past Mohac and can actually talk about the and have a better idea how to talk about the medieval political systems, because that's when the Middle Ages end, and I can sort of make a whole big outline of it. Uh, I don't. I think the Duelist was quite good, although I'm having trouble remembering it right now. It was certainly more entertaining than Napoleon, if I remember correctly. The the transition, honestly, the one video I'm also sort of mulling over is that how we outlined what the Middle Ages are, because we sort of denote them with specific years and specific events, but those can vary between countries, and it's a again, it's a rather Eurocentric concept when you get down to it, but it's an interesting video if I can write it right. Sorry, just grabbing a drink. Yes, it's honestly a an interesting thing when it comes to, well, when it comes to art and historical eras, because they tend to not exactly overlap with each other, but there's a lot more, and they tend to, they don't follow each other. They tend to somehow overlap at different points with each other, and you also have those moments of transition between the styles, and then deliberate combinations of different styles that is interesting to see. And there's just people that there's always the trouble with identifying the different artistic and architectural styles and things, because you also tend to get some styles that go heavily in one direction and another that is a complete repudiation of the previous style, like you get from Baroque to Classicism, with one side going to Classicism and simplifications, then to Rococo, which is just Baroque on on the on ecstasy. um, and then you have, I mean, and then there's there's the great shift in even recent in the transition from the historic styles to the 20th century styles. That is always interesting to look at, because it doesn't have just an artistic element to it, like I've heard far too many tour guides describe. There's also the fact that a lot of the styles that follow certain styles are far cheaper far cheaper to make, because they take less time, less work, and less people to employ than these and then previous styles. Like the shift from the historic styles of the 19th century to the simplified Art Deco or the secession movements in Austria-Hungary, where you don't need these big statues, these carved ornaments, because they're some say the architects will say they're heavy, that they encumber the building and so on and so forth, but they are also more expensive than just not making them. Which is what some people opt for, because, well, it is an expense. I have been thinking about covering some of the. I am going to mention some of the literary and things developments in the series as it goes, because this is an era where we start to get really into literature and theater and poetry, where that all starts. And I am thinking about going into some works that describe either historical events or are important in some way historically to, well, either in, well, they're either going to be Croatian works, or they're going to be some English works that I know of, or even French, but because those are the main three things I know how to speak and, well, speak and read. But I am also looking into other things. I love when history books do mention works of literature or art pieces that I can look into from well, Hungarian history or Czech history or so on and so forth, because they're really important when it comes to referencing things and to do something recognizable for the audience, even if it's only part of the audience. But I am thinking about that. It's going to become a big thing. It's honestly going to be very important when we get to the 18th and 19th century, where literature isn't just works that were written. They are tools to interpret society, and and some of them are, well, records of a time that was, even if it's sometimes even if it's well, fiction that is set in well, the fiction that's set in normal time and everything, it still records how things were perceived and how people lived, because there would have been not been a reason to make some of these things up. You get that especially in I mean, it's an overwhelming theme in Croatian 19th century literature about the lives of peasants and the differentiation and the transition between the city and the country and those sorts of things, which are very important to understanding the urbanization and those trends that start popping up. Especially when you get into the 20th century and start. Sorry? Especially when you get into the 20th century and you start with the whole changes that brings, and even social and social, economic, and just life in general, as more and more people stop living in the country and start living in cities. Like, yeah, literature is going to play a big part when we get to the appropriate time. No problem. Thank you. Okay. Any more questions for today about the topic or anything else? I do wonder sometimes what the latency is on this. Yeah, well, thank you. Honestly, I've been working most of the week on other things and on the drawing the episode, so this was like a last minute idea that I thought that I could do in the morning and do most of the work for it in the this morning, and I did. So it's I am trying to deliver on the normal programming. It's just things keep getting in the way. And I do need a break sometimes. So otherwise I can't work. So yeah, thank you all for coming, and I'm gonna leave it up for a minute more to see if any questions come in, but thank you all for coming, and see you all probably next week again. If nothing pops up, and I'll probably think of a new topic. We may even take a look at some other things. Thank you. It's sort of like I can get into the production steam of it for like several weeks in a row if I pre-prepare and everything. But then usually in like end of November, I've gotten sick or something, and then like production would suffer for months. And I wouldn't deliver it until early spring next year, but I don't think it's gonna happen this time around. Hopefully not. Because every year I'm gonna be finished by Christmas, and then like every World War I'm not. I honestly, it was a few afternoons of experimentation with different designs. Like before like the initial design was to try and have round heads and necks and like body separated, but then I realized I don't really need the neck, and it was just the round head on this body sort of, and then I realized, well, I don't really need the head either. and then things sort of came together from there. uh, it would have looked a bit odder right now if I'm honest, but it's sort of this simple design that also was meant to be quick to produce, because I was trying to do, when I was designing this, I was trying to, also it was during my studies and preparations for other things, and I was looking for something that I could easily make that would be depictive and would convey everything, and this sort of worked out. It's experimenting, honestly. Honestly, this whole model that I'm using was also mostly me playing around with the software to do it. Like I had wanted to. Yeah, yes, that's something. Honestly, I am considering a sort of redesign that because I have, like, I'm not a I'm not a trained. I haven't really trained as an artist or anything, but yeah, that is one of the problems that I'm also noticing. But and changes that I'm considering, but it also carries like other things. So probably, yeah, I am considering because like when I started, you'll notice that some of the interior of the characters didn't have outlines between the colors because I thought that looked better at the time, but then I realized no, it doesn't look better. And you'll still see some coloring mistakes when I've made things either too bright or too white that that it just blends into the background. It's because I'm also working when I'm working on a gray or some sort of a different background to try and make that work. And I don't notice those changes sometimes. Mistakes happen. But yeah, I am considering to make it a bit more thinner, like this model currently. Like this is like increased in size from the original model, and then I've yeah, like the current model is like it's increased in size from the original outline, and then I've just drawn over it a bit to make it look the same. So I am considering it right now because it worked out. Yeah, it's trying different things, and it's sort of when you're I mean, I'm self-taught, so it's everything's a historian's not supposed to draw his own things. uh, but I'm glad I do. Like it's a different mishmash of things that I wanted to try and do, and it's fun just experimenting and trying to do things on your own. I don't know what I'd do with that, honestly, sometimes. Like, if I ever did that, like, how much would things visibly change? Because it's all. I've been working from necessity from opportunity and necessity mostly. So I don't. So. And I consider those restrictions somehow to be beneficial to the thing I'm working on. So, I mean, I do want to have more time to work on these. It's just that, well, I don't, so I need to deal with it. But anyway, we're coming up on to the final stretch. If nobody has any last minute questions, thank you all for coming, and see you next week. I need to figure out the latency on this. Thank you. Goodbye. See you. Yeah, okay. Have a good night, everyone. Well, if it is night or day or whatever.